Political fortunes can flip overnight, you know, but rarely do they hinge on a misplaced line on a map and an 18-year-old tattoo.
Yeah, that is definitely a pretty wild combination.
Right. Well, welcome to the deep dive. We are looking at a really fascinating and, frankly, explosive political moment today.
Oh, absolutely.
Midterms are coming up fast, the landscape is shifting, and recently CNN dropped this massive trove of polling data. So today we're digging into a stack of conservative political commentary and transcripts that are analyzing that exact CNN data.
And the picture they paint of the Democratic Party heading into these elections is, I mean, it's basically a dashboard covered in flashing red warning lights.
Exactly. But really quick, before we get into it, a crucial disclaimer for you listening. If you're wondering why we are dedicating a whole deep dive to highly partisan, right-leaning commentary here, is the reality.
Right. You have to look at the opposition's playbook.
Exactly. To understand the modern political battlefield, you have to look at the exact data the opposition is using. We aren't here to endorse these right-wing viewpoints or, take political sides. We are just here to impartially break down the factual claims and the polling data driving this narrative.
Because knowledge is most valuable when you understand multiple perspectives.
Yeah.
You just can't grasp the strategy unless you look at the raw materials they're using to build their arguments.
Spot on. So let's start with the macro-level view before we get into the wild candidate scandals.
The 30-point plummet.
Yes, the 30-point plummet. The conservative commentators use the CNN data to argue the party is just completely fractured. And the numbers they highlight are, frankly, startling. They zero in on a massive drop in net approval among the Democratic base.
Yeah, the party is sitting at a -9 net approval rating with its own voters.
But wait, let me pause you there. Is a -9 net approval actually a rare thing? Or is that just like standard midterm slump numbers for the party in power?
Oh no, it is incredibly rare. The commentators provide some really vital historical context to hammer this point home. Congressional Democrats have previously always maintained a positive net approval rating from their own party in, well, every past Congress on record.
Wait, really? Every past Congress?
Yeah. I mean, they might lose the middle or lose independence, but the base usually stays loyal. So seeing them underwater with the people who actually, volunteer and donate to them, that is a seismic shift in the data.
And it gets even weirder when you look at the satisfaction metrics. Only 46% of Democrats are currently satisfied with their party.
Right, and the commentary directly compares that to July of 2024.
Oh, right after Joe Biden's debate performance.
Exactly. After a widely criticized debate during one of the most panicked moments in recent political history, 53% of the base was still satisfied with the party.
So they're actually polling worse right now than they were during a full-blown existential crisis.
Yeah. Which brings us to the underlying mechanism driving this drop. If you look at the crosstabs of the data, this isn't just like generalized frustration.
Right.
It's a massive ideological divide. The data shows that 61% of all voters want the Democratic Party to move to the center.
61%.
Yeah. Conversely, only 28% want to move to the left.
It's like a company where the board of directors is just completely ignoring its consumer data. If 61% of your customers are actively telling you to change the product and you refuse, you really shouldn't be surprised when sales plummet.
That's a great analogy.
But how do the conservative analysts explain that refusal? Like, if the numbers are that clear, why would the establishment refuse to pivot to the center?
So the argument here is that party leadership has adopted this elitist, almost authoritarian attitude. The right-leaning commentary claims the establishment is fundamentally uninterested in what the average voter actually wants.
Wow.
Yeah. Instead of catering to the center, they argue leadership is pushing a far-left agenda and relying entirely on negative partisanship.
Meaning they're coasting on the assumption that voters dislike the conservative opposition so much that they'll just swallow their own party's leftward shift.
Precisely. They expect the base to just fall in line under the threat of shame and ostracization.
Okay, so if the board of directors is ignoring the data, what does the actual product look like on the shelves? Which brings us to how this plays out on the ground, specifically Maine.
Oh, the battle for the Senate.
Yes. The commentary zooms in on candidate quality, pointing to a glaring controversy that could literally decide who controls the United States Senate.
We're talking about Graham Platner.
Graham Platner. He's the Senate candidate in Maine.
Yeah.
And the conservative media is just heavily focused on his background, which is riddled with severe controversies.
Let's lay out the facts they're weaponizing here.
Yeah.
First, Platner had a tattoo of a Nazi concentration camp guard on his chest.
And he had it for 18 years.
Right. And the critics in this commentary completely reject any excuse that it was just some naive, youthful mistake. They emphasize that he fully understood what that symbol represented for nearly 2 decades.
And they compound that historical baggage with a very modern scandal. I mean, Platner was recently exposed for sexting multiple women on an app that is notoriously popular with teenagers.
Yeah, and he was doing this while married and while actively running for the Senate.
It's just wild. The commentators frame this not just as a political gaffe, but as demonstrating a severe and disturbing lack of character.
Oh, they go after his entire political identity, too. The commentary highlights a critique, which, by the way, they gleefully note is shared even by some frustrated Democratic strategists, that Platner's essentially cosplaying the working class.
Right. There's this brutal quote circulating from a strategist who says Platner wears his working class persona, quote, like a Halloween costume.
Ouch. And the political fallout of all this is massive, right? Maine is an absolute must-win for Democratic control of the Senate.
Yeah, it's essential.
So because of these compounded scandals, the conservative analysis refers to a Platner tax that's weighing down the entire ticket.
A Platner tax.
Yeah. Before these revelations dropped, prediction markets and general polling favored the Democrats to hold that seat. Now, because of this Platner tax, those same markets have shifted to slightly favor Republicans.
It's gotten so toxic that high-profile figures within the party are having to do direct damage control. The text mentions that Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren actually had to pull Platner into a private meeting.
Yeah, they had to look him in the eye and directly ask if there were any more sexual assault allegations waiting to drop before Election Day.
Which is just an insane place for a campaign to be in. But this is where the conservative commentary pivots from attacking Platner to attacking the broader Democratic establishment, right?
Exactly.
Because I just can't wrap my head around the political math here. The establishment spent years hammering their political opponents, like Donald Trump, for rhetoric associations they deemed hateful. So, based on the text, what is the tactical justification for burning all that moral capital to save one specific candidate who literally walked around with a Nazi tattoo?
According to the analysis we're reading, it is pure mathematical desperation. They call it a win-at-all-costs mentality.
Win at all costs.
Right. The conservative argument is that the establishment is doing Olympic-level mental gymnastics to defend Platner simply because he is their only mathematical path to holding the Senate majority.
So they're trapped.
Exactly. The critique is that by defending him, the party is proving that their past outrage over offensive symbols was purely performative. They're willing to abandon their stated morals the second it becomes politically inconvenient.
Wow. Okay, so Maine is a disaster born of deep personal candidate flaws. But this conservative analysis also points to places where the candidate is functioning exactly as intended, but the ideology itself is the problem.
Right, moving from personal flaws to ideological ones.
Yeah, they claim that in places like New York City, the crisis is driven by outright ideological extremism that is pushing everyday voters away.
The prime example they use for this argument is Darla Abala-Chevalier, a congressional candidate in New York City.
The commentary details her deleted social media posts, which are pretty explosive. In these posts, she called the United States an effing disgrace and heavily disparaged Kamala Harris.
Yeah, conservative media uses her as the poster child for their broader narrative. They claim the Democratic establishment is actively prioritizing radical leftism. They use highly charged terminology throughout this section, arguing the party is elevating candidates who champion communism and open borders,
while simultaneously demonizing moderate candidates who just want to focus on basic common sense and public safety.
Right, which introduces a really fascinating psychological concept in their analysis, the modern silent majority.
I found this part incredibly interesting because it touches on the human element of politics. They describe this silent majority not as secret conservatives, but as everyday, moderate Democrats.
People who just want normalcy.
Exactly. They want safe parks without encampments. They want clean streets. But they feel entirely intimidated by the far left wing of their own party.
The commentators argue these voters live in fear of shame, name-calling, and social ostracization if they dare to prioritize public safety over progressive ideology.
So they just stay quiet. They don't argue on social media. But privately, they are planning to walk into the voting booth and pull the lever for a Republican.
Right.
It reminds me of a pendulum, Political momentum can swing so violently in one direction that gravity just forces it to violently swing back the other way.
That makes a lot of sense.
But let's strip away the hyperbole for a second. The sources use incredibly strong rhetoric here, claiming the party is captured by the far left. How does this source material connect a highly localized controversy in New York City back to that massive 30-point drop in national trust we talked about at the beginning?
It connects directly through the mechanism of alienation. The argument is that when national leadership ignores the 61% of voters begging for a pivot to the center and instead elevates candidates who publicly call the country a disgrace, it breaks the fundamental social contract between the party and its base.
I see.
Yeah, the conservative commentators argue that the 30-point drop isn't an anomaly. It's the measurable mathematical result of everyday voters feeling like their party no longer represents their basic daily concerns.
So we are seeing this loss of control at the voter level in New York, and we are seeing the loss of candidate quality control in Maine. But what is truly crazy about this analysis is that they point out the party is even losing control in places where they literally draw the maps.
Oh, the redistricting backfire. We have to talk about California. This is where the structural hubris really comes into play.
Yeah, the commentary breaks down Governor Gavin Newsom's gerrymandering efforts, specifically focusing on the redrawing of California's 6th congressional district.
And the intended goal of gerrymandering that district was incredibly straightforward. State leadership redrew the maps to intentionally disenfranchise Republican voters in that area and create a guaranteed, easy Democratic pickup.
But the actual result was a spectacular failure. And to understand why, we have to look at the mechanics of California's election system. California uses a jungle primary system. This means that all candidates, regardless of their political party, run on the same primary ballot. And the top 2 vote-getters advance to the general election, even if they're from the same party.
And this is exactly where the gerrymandering mathematically backfired. Because the newly drawn 6th district looked like such an incredibly safe, guaranteed win for a Democrat, too many Democratic candidates jumped into the primary race.
Let's break down the math on how that actually works, because it's fascinating. Imagine a district that is 60% blue and 40% red.
Okay.
If you have 5 Democrats running because they all think it's an easy win, that 60% blue vote gets fractured into tiny fractions, right? Maybe 12% each. Meanwhile, if the Republicans only run 2 candidates, they split their 40% into 20% each.
Which means the result is that the 2 candidates with 20% of the vote take the top 2 spots. The majority party completely fractures its own base and locks itself out.
Which is exactly the stunning outcome that happened here. The top 2 candidates advancing in this guaranteed Democratic district are an independent who actually happens to be the incumbent, Kevin Keeley, a former Republican and a Republican candidate.
That's just wild.
The Democrats literally over-engineered their own custom-drawn district so heavily that they boxed themselves off the final ballot.
It's incredible. And the commentary highlights a massive secondary effect to this maneuver. They argue this aggressive attempt to rewrite the map and guarantee an outcome actually woke up the opposition.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it invigorated conservative and independent voters who felt manipulated by the state, sparking a noticeable rightward shift even within deep blue California strongholds.
It is like tuning a high-performance engine to run so hot and so tight to get maximum output that the slightest bump in the road causes the entire engine block to crack. They tried to make the map so perfectly foolproof that it shattered.
Yeah.
So how do the critics in our sources use this specific mathematical failure as proof that the party has fundamentally lost the plot?
Well, they use it as the ultimate example of a party blinded by its own arrogance. The conservative critics argue that when a political establishment relies on institutional tricks like gerrymandering a guaranteed win, instead of doing the hard work of running candidates that people actually like, they get sloppy.
That makes sense.
Yeah, the California failure proves to these commentators that the establishment genuinely believed they could dictate the outcome from a spreadsheet, completely bypassing the will of the voters. It's the ultimate proof, in their eyes, of a party that thinks it's smarter than the electorate.
Wow. Let's pull all these threads together. The core narrative we have synthesized from this conservative playbook today starts with a historic 30-point plunge in internal approval ratings, driven by a base desperately wanting a move to the center.
Right.
We looked at the mechanics of how control of the Senate is being jeopardized by the Platner tax in Maine, where leadership is burning moral capital to defend a candidate with an 18-year-old Nazi tattoo. We explored the psychological alienation of moderate voters through extreme rhetoric in New York City. And finally, we broke down the mathematical irony of gerrymandered maps in California that literally boxed a party off its own ballot.
And the reason you need to understand the anatomy of these critiques, regardless of where you fall on the political spectrum, is because this isn't just complaining.
Right.
This is strategy. These specific data points, these mathematical anomalies, and these specific scandals are the exact fuel driving the opposition's momentum. This is the narrative defining the battleground for the upcoming midterms.
You simply have to know the plays being called on the field if you want to understand the game. Which leaves us with a final provocative thought for you to mull over.
Yeah, I'm ready.
When a political party finds that its safest gerrymandered districts are mathematically backfiring and its most heavily backed candidates are turning into massive, toxic liabilities, at what point does a campaign strategy have to completely abandon the idea of going on the offensive just to perform basic, survival-level damage control?
Man, it is the kind of tactical pivot that could easily decide the balance of power in Washington.
It really is. Like we said at the top, political fortunes can flip over the absolute craziest things, a drawn line on a California map or an 18-year-old tattoo in Maine. Thanks for taking this deep dive and exploring the material alongside us. We will catch you next time.